Okay, so this is going to be the 25-minute drawing. So this one is going to be on big paper. It's going to be on your newsprint. So don't use any of your good paper for this, because we're going to use the good paper for the figure drawing that you're going to use for your good project. So your timer goes on up here, and you're not going to be able to pause it on the last one because it gave you a 5-minute break, but you can go back and select some of the other ones that maybe you've drawn before. So like if you want to give it a shot, like, let's see, kind of like that one. I want to get something a little more dynamic. But each time that you do this, it kind of starts over with the time. I like that one. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this stuff down here, so when you click that little eye thing, it helps. So what I'm going to do, just like we've done in the past, is trace in space. And again, I'm more concerned about the actual spine at this point, and I want to kind of think about what that curvature is going to look like. So it's like it starts up here and it slowly kind of like dips off to the right just a little bit. And so again, I'm using my pencil like we've done in the past. Just go lightly with this until you feel like you have it. Then what we're going to do is we're going to build the rib cage. And so the rib cage, and this is again why we want to draw the nude model. We want to be able to see the breaks in all of the different skeletal structures. That's how we start. We draw from the inside out. So I'm going to go ahead and get that rib cage kind of element in there. And when you think about the rib cage, you want to think about how it splits down the middle, and you want to look at the contrapposto that's happening in here. In other words, she has all of her weight on one foot, right? So that causes the tilt to like skew back a little bit this way. And as such, I probably need to make sure that this side of the rib cage is down further than the other. So I'm just going to draw in a basic simple shape for that. Always kind of thought of these as G.I. Joe men or whatever when they're put together. There's going to be a little bit of a gap in between where all the abdominal muscles and guts and everything are. And so we're going to leave a little gap inside of there, and then we're going to look at the pelvis. What we want to do is look at the hip placement of the pelvis. And so if I've got something like this and it's kind of angled like that, I want it to be angling like this. So if you notice, this is kind of angled like this, and this like this. So the pelvis itself is going to be going the other way. And that's going to help us see that this area right here is bearing all of the weight, or most of the weight. And so again, I kind of think like a doll or a Barbie doll or something, like, you know, what would that shape look like? Kind of a pentagon type shape like that. Now I'm going to start focusing on joints. I always like to start on the on the torso joints first, especially if I have a frontal view like this. And so this one up here, I'm just gonna like create something in there. I know that this one's got to be behind that one because she's turned slightly, and so I'm just gonna bring that in just a little bit instead of way out here, because that's gonna help show that she's turning a little bit more. Now I'm gonna go ahead and worry about the hip joints, right? And so I have this one back behind, so it's kind of like the opposite of this. So I'm gonna bring that up. This one's coming forward and toward us, so I'm going to bring that down just a little bit. Again, contrapposto is what this one's all about. That's how it's spelled. It's Italian. Like everything else for whatever reason. Okay, so we have that going on. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and get the legs in there, and I'm going to look at the major gesture of the leg that's happening. So once I feel like I have that, I'm going to look at the other one. I'm going to get that angled back. And so as not to confuse myself, I'm going to create a little break in that. And notice I haven't finished this out. I'm not going to worry about that. I know that this foot's going to be lower than this one. So this is where I want to do that imaginary grid concept. So if I draw a line straight across, I know that that foot's going to be touching there, but this foot has to be back here somewhere. So I come up a little bit like that, and that's going to help me see that that foot should terminate right in this location behind her. Now I'm going to go ahead and start looking at how the arms are moving across. This arm is moving almost straight across, but it kind of comes down. So I'm going to point that pretty much straight over the other shoulder. We can't even see that shoulder, so we know that that's got to be overlapping. So really, we need to figure out what's happening here before we can even drop this up in here. This is where pencil sighting comes in handy. So if I've already measured out like a leg, I might go ahead and measure out how far this should go out. So if this leg is this long, and I go from that shoulder, it looks like I'm gonna have room from that shoulder for both hands for whatever this size is. So if I look at this and I take that out here, that's gonna be a good termination for both hands. So now I can go ahead and drop in a couple of little place markers for both hands. So if this is a hand here, we know that we can break the elbow in here. If you look at that elbow and its relationship to the middle of the figure, it's slightly off from the middle because she's turned a little bit. So I know this is the middle of my figure, so I'm probably gonna make my elbow right there. So we use all these little perspective devices to help us get the figure in perspective and get it correct. Only now am I gonna start worrying about structure, right? You notice I haven't like worried anything whatsoever about like modeling or any of that. So once I have all this correct, then I'm ready to go. So now I'm gonna start fleshing out like that arm. So I'm gonna just kind of think about shape analysis. Using a long oval to get the musculature in there. It's gonna dip a little bit, okay? Continue to draw lightly. We're gonna build out the elbow just a little bit here because we know the elbow should be a little bit bigger. And then we're gonna go ahead and build out some forearm here. And again, I'm drawing over this stuff. I don't care about that. I'm gonna clean it up later. And this is gonna come out here. Now what I'm seeing is that maybe like I did extend this just a little bit too long. It looks kind of weird because, well, no, because when I look at this, okay, it does go out quite a ways. So I can do some modification here, maybe get it to push out a little more. I think I'm gonna move my elbow out here. So you wanna be like going back and forth with your subject. When I do hands, like when I'm just figure drawing at this point, I'm going to just make a really basic gesture for those hands. I just kind of do a planar analysis thing where I get all the fingers lined up like this. I just want it to look like she's holding something. I don't really care, you know, for the articulation of all the fingers. And same for that kind of fish shape over here. I'm just gonna treat them like, almost like oven mitts or something, like a basic shape like that. And then I know that I've got the scabbard of the sword coming out here, and I'm just gonna get a reference for that. Later, I'll add more stuff to that. Okay, so I need to get that other arm coming in under here. So that's gonna be a handy situation for me to bring from here down to here. Because if I look at this, I really don't see much of it, but I do see that there's an elbow right here, and it's lined up right with that hand. So we're always looking at little equivalencies all the time when we're drawing the figure. The figure is very dynamic. It's one of the most complex forms in the world to draw. It's constantly moving and changing. Everybody is different, and those nuances between figures make all the difference in terms of an objective drawing. I'm gonna do a little bit of shading in there just to denote that it's behind the other one so I don't get confused with that. Okay, let's go ahead and get the head thing going on. So her neck is crooked like this, so I'm gonna go ahead and, just like I've done before, taught in still life, we get that angle by dropping it here and then just come straight over. And we're gonna go ahead and drop the head on there. And it's okay for this to be really simple at this point because I'm more worried about gesture and basic form than I am about like perfection. I'm checking my time, I got about 17 minutes. I should be able to get a really good drawing out of this today. Don't be discouraged if your first one is not awesome. Well, I mean, you know, what is this, like your 12th? But your first big one isn't awesome. Don't be discouraged because we're gonna practice and practice until you do get good at this. So I'm just gonna get a little facsimile of her face in here, not real detailed. And that's okay. All right, we're getting there now. So now I'm gonna start thinking about this contour out here. So as I'm following this shoulder, seeing I need to bring that in, it's a bit of a bulge right there. I do have a tendency to make my figures a little bulky. I don't really know why. It's probably because I like learned how to draw my figures, mostly from like X-Men comics and stuff. I'm kind of paying attention to how this swoops in, and then, you know, we have these little curvature elements here. One thing about drawing men and female, male and females, typically females are going to have like a wider hip base than men. Not all the time, but you know, typically. But men will have a larger torso base than women, again, typically. Just like with portraits, it's not perfect. Now I'm going to look at how this comes down on the side and then truncates off of that rib cage. So I've got a pretty good place marker for that. I feel like I can go kind of straight down, but then I'm just gonna kick out a little bit here to really get that nice curvature of the hip out here. Sometimes I'll draw several times like this, just like when we were working with spheres and things like that before, because I know something's gonna be right in there. Now I'm gonna focus on the break in value here between kind of the pelvic area and where this first muscle of the quad comes out. It looks like I can kind of go off of what I have for this pelvis to help me. And I'm really focused on that break in value. And what I want to do is make sure that this hip is really protruding forward. That way this one looks like it's going backwards. So we're just trying to develop that illusion. Looking at where the knees are here, I can see that this knee is much higher back here than this one. So I'm gonna take a look at the difference between hip to knee and knee to the bottom of the foot, and it's about equal. So I'm down with that being the knee. I think that's gonna work. Excuse me. So I'm gonna get a little musculature in there. That helps me because, again, that's a frame of reference for me. So when I see a quadricep in there, I see like some kind of a break, I like to sketch those in, and then later I add more stuff to that to make it more detailed. I'm gonna go ahead and start adding some of the calf muscles in there. Got a more protruded calf muscle on the inside than on the outside because of the angle at which her foot is going. Can't really see it, but her foot is going this way. So I'm gonna just drop a slant in there like that. Let's see here. I'm gonna go ahead and articulate some of that musculature here. I'm gonna bring this in. I'm gonna add that little interior bony part here. I'm gonna drop in the heel. And then again, I'm not too worried about like how the feet are gonna look at this point because we'll focus on feet and hands later. So I'm gonna go pretty generic with that. And you may think this is really big, but a trick that I learned in undergraduate school was that if I made my feet a little bit bigger on standing figures, it really helped set them down better. Some of my figures had a tendency to float when I made them really smaller. They look like they'd fall over kind of thing. So now I'm gonna go ahead and deal with this crazy foreshortened thing back here. So I have kind of this lump and bulge off of the hip bone that's protruding out here to help me. But this muscle right here is gonna be the real thing that I wanna like capture. So I think I'm gonna come in just a little bit. I'm gonna pop that back out and really exaggerate that. I'm gonna add a little bit of the knee that I can see back there. And since we want this to kind of stick out a little bit, I'm gonna have to modify that. Notice I haven't erased yet, right? I'm not there yet. Okay. This is a pretty dark image, so I'm gonna have to get in there and take a look. I can see a little bit of the ankle coming off this side of the knee, weirdly. Not ankle, but probably calf. So I'm gonna bring that back out here. You can see a little bit more of that. And it looks like most of this is gonna be comprised of the foot itself. So I'm gonna start with the ball of the foot. And again, it's gonna like kind of look weird, but that pointer toe is really what's touching, and then that second toe here. So then I'm gonna go ahead and bring this across like that. And this will take a lot more shading and stuff to look more correct. I may even have to move it in just a little bit, but for now I'm pretty happy with it, so I'm gonna leave that. Okay. All right, so now I'm gonna start looking at more details like where the fat of the belly is starting to protrude. Give myself a little bit of shading in that area just to kind of like create a place marker for it. Come up just a little bit, drop that belly button up in there. A little bit of musculature on the side, just again for a place marker. And then I'm gonna kind of like skew that musculature based upon what I see in here. I'm gonna bring some of that shadowing up in here. The rib cage is not quite as defined as I made it, but I used that to help me, right? So that means I'll have to take a little bit of that out later. And we'll get the breasts involved in there. And so I'm just gonna start with this simple kind of like oval shape, and I'm trying to get that same oval shape to happen here. And then I can articulate the shadowing later. this oval shape is going to kind of go the other way. And because of the way she's turned a little bit, there's a little bit of a variance in the way that the breasts are laying. And so what I like to do is kind of like play off of the symmetry of the figure. And so if I were to like line the actual aerials up a little bit, I would have to draw a line like that across, give myself a little area there for that one. This one looks like it's going to be up into the side, so I'll use that right there. And if I think that's wrong, I'll fix it later. Okay, so now is the time when I would do some erasing. I want to get all of my pentimento. Pentimento are like little marks like this, or marks like this, or incorrect marks that we would leave on there. Some people really love that. Most people don't when they want to create a good drawing. So I'm actually going to take out a lot of my planning marks now, and this is why it should be pretty light so that you can get rid of it. I think we'll work up to charcoal on Thursday, and I'm referencing often what the shadows look like in here. So once I kind of have this drawn, now it's time to start shadowing with my darker pencils. I did all this with an HB. Took layout, and I'm going to go in with some 4B and 6B. Shade it as best I can. Again, I don't want to use blenders on this if I can get away with that. Definitely want to get a lot out of here because that shoulder is really, really bright in terms of what I see in there. Also looks like I would like to use, yeah, that's my other shoulder there, so this is my elbow. So if you kind of start to get confused or whatever, this step will help, because you'll start to see a little bit better what's going on. Also, if you see any mistakes that you've made, like I'm seeing here, maybe I like could have brought this out a little bit more to try to get a little closer to what's happening here, because I think I made this a little too exaggerated. I can fix that.